You've probably heard that Rome was the greatest empire the world has ever seen. But what almost no one tells you is the real reason behind it. It wasn't the politicians, it wasn't the philosophers, and with all due respect, it wasn't the stone roads that allowed Rome to dominate the known world for centuries. It was blood. It was sweat. It was the men who walked onto a battlefield as ordinary human beings and walked out, when they walked out at all, as something history can barely classify. And here's the part that will make you uncomfortable. Most people spend their entire lives admiring Rome for its architecture, its laws, its politics, and never stop to face what truly held all of it together. The warriors, the deadliest, the most brutal, the most extraordinary men to ever set foot on this earth. Forget everything you learned in school about the Roman Empire. Those classes talked about dates, emperors, and battles with hard-to-pronounce names, but they never showed you the faces. They never told you about the man who fought in over 100 battles and survived every single one. They never told you about the soldier who kept fighting with his body riddled with arrows, refusing to fall as if death itself simply didn't have permission to come near him. And they most certainly never introduced you to the gladiator who was granted freedom not once but 4 times and refused it every time. These are not fictional characters, these are real men, documented by history, whose stories are so absurd they sound made up. And the most disturbing part? What made them so lethal isn't what you think. The secret this video is about to reveal goes far beyond sharp swords and muscular bodies. What you're about to discover is a system, a human transformation machine so efficient that it took ordinary men and turned them into something the modern world still hasn't fully been able to replicate. Every warrior you're about to meet carries a lesson that goes far beyond ancient history, a lesson about mindset, about purpose, about what happens when a human being is pushed beyond every limit and consciously decides not to stop. If you think you know Rome, get ready to realize you've barely scratched the surface. What comes next will completely change the way you see not just the Roman Empire, but human potential itself. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any stories. So sit back, because this story is about to begin. When it comes to the most lethal warriors to ever set foot in the Roman Empire, one name rises like an unshakable wall: Lucius Siccius Dentatus. This man took part in hundreds of battles, earned more military decorations than almost anyone in Roman history, and most impressively, walked away alive from every single one of them. Not by luck, but through an absurd level of skill, combat awareness, and physical endurance that turned every confrontation into a masterclass in survival. He was the kind of warrior who became more lethal with every fight, because every battle was a school, and he was its most dedicated student. Dentatus's secret lay in a concept the Romans mastered like no one else: adaptive learning in combat. While ordinary soldiers entered battle hoping to survive, Dentatus entered to study the enemy, refine his own reflexes, and leave more dangerous than when he arrived. Today, this same principle shows up in elite athletes and top military strategists. Properly processed experience becomes an unbeatable competitive advantage. Dentatus understood this 2,000 years before any self-help book existed. And as you take in that mindset, get ready, because the next warrior will show you that the Roman Empire also knew how to create something few armies have ever seen: a man capable of turning his own body into an entire battlefield. If Dentatus was proof that experience forges the greatest warriors, Cassius Sceva was proof that some men simply refuse to fall. A centurion under Julius Caesar, this man fought in battle with his body pierced by arrows, over 100 projectiles embedded in his shield and wounds spread across his body, and still remained standing, holding his position as if pain were nothing more than an irrelevant detail. To truly understand the magnitude of this feat, you need to understand what a centurion was. Not just a fighter, but the beating heart of the legion, the link between a general's strategy and the brutal reality of the front line. A centurion kept formation intact under extreme pressure, punished desertion on the spot, and made tactical decisions in fractions of a second. Think of him as a manager in a company under crisis. The CEO may have the vision, but it's the one on the ground who determines whether the operation survives or collapses. Scaeva's ability to keep fighting while severely wounded wasn't madness. It was a powerful message to every soldier around him. If the centurion doesn't break, none of us break. And speaking of men who refuse to accept limitations, the next warrior on this list will prove that Rome was capable of something even more extraordinary. Imagine losing your dominant hand in battle, and instead of ending your military career, having an iron prosthetic made and returning to the battlefield as if nothing had happened. That's exactly what Marcus Sergius Sillus did, centuries before any modern rehabilitation technology existed. Sillus didn't just keep fighting with an iron hand, he became one of Rome's most respected warriors, proving that the identity of a Roman soldier was greater than any limitation the body could impose. And what makes his story even more fascinating is what it reveals about the Roman mindset. Rome didn't discard its veterans when they suffered severe injuries. It invested in ways to keep them in combat, because it understood a veteran's experience was far more valuable than the raw strength of a recruit. It's similar to modern rehabilitation programs in U.S. Special Forces, where soldiers who lose limbs receive high-tech prosthetics and return to active duty. Rome was doing this 2,000 years ago with cast iron and sheer willpower. And if you thought Sillus redefined the limits of a Roman warrior, wait until you meet the next name on this list, a man who, when handed his freedom, chose something that will make you question everything you know about human motivation. What drives a man to refuse his own freedom? Flamma was a Syrian gladiator who was awarded the rudis, the wooden sword that symbolized freedom, not once, not twice, but 4 times throughout his career, and he refused it every single time. 4 times Rome said, "You are free," and 4 times Flamma looked at that blood-soaked arena and answered, "I'd rather stay." To most people, that sounds like madness, but once you understand what drove this man, it starts to make perfect sense. For Flamma, the arena wasn't a prison, it was the only place where he felt truly alive. Gladiators who reached his level of fame enjoyed absolute recognition, a clear sense of purpose, and an identity so strong that any other life felt empty by comparison. Modern psychologists would call this identity-purpose fusion, the same phenomenon that drives elite athletes to keep competing long after they've achieved financial success. Michael Jordan came out of retirement twice. Flamma refused freedom 4 times. At its core, the logic is the same. And speaking of behavior that defies common logic, the next warrior was the exact opposite of Flamma, a man whose style was pure, controlled chaos. If you've ever watched HBO's Rome, you already know the name Titus Pullo, and it's no coincidence the writers chose it. Pullo was real, mentioned in Julius Caesar's own accounts, and his most striking trait wasn't brute strength or refined technique, but a fighting style that blended explosive aggression with an instinctive ability to survive situations where any other soldier would have already fallen. While most Roman warriors strictly followed formation discipline, Pullo broke the line, plunged into chaos, and came out the other side, still standing. The brilliance of the Roman system was exactly that. Instead of forcing every soldier into the same mold, Rome channeled each man's natural traits into roles where they were most effective. Pullo wasn't punished for his impulsiveness, he was valued for it. Because on a vulnerable flank or in total chaos, a man like him was worth 10 disciplined soldiers. The best companies in the world do the same thing today. Identify each person's natural profile and place them where it becomes an advantage. Rome understood this 2,000 years before modern HR even existed. And speaking of the Roman system as a whole, it's time to reveal the real secret behind all this lethality. You've just met 5 warriors who defy logic and push the limits of the human body, but there's one question that needs to be answered. Were these men lethal because they were born extraordinary, or because they were shaped by something greater? The truth is, Rome didn't rely on heroes, Rome created heroes. And it did so through a system so precise and efficient that it turned ordinary men into war machines with astonishing consistency. The formula behind Roman supremacy can be broken down into 4 pillars: collective discipline, military engineering, effective leadership, and constant adaptation. Remove any one of these elements and the entire empire begins to crack. This model doesn't belong only to ancient Rome, it appears in every high-performance system that has ever existed. U.S. Navy SEALs operate on these exact 4 pillars. Companies like Google, Apple, and Amazon build their cultures on the same foundation. The warriors were the visible face of the machine, but the machine itself was the real secret. And to truly understand how that machine worked in practice, you need to look inside the structure that held it all together. Imagine 5,000 men operating with the precision of a Swiss watch in the middle of the absolute chaos of battle. That was the ideal of the Roman legion. Each legion was divided into 10 cohorts, each cohort into centuries of 80 men, and each century was led by a centurion who was personally responsible with his own life for the unit's cohesion. This structure allowed Rome to move entire armies with the fluidity of an orchestra. Every soldier knew exactly where he was, what he had to do, and who he had to obey, even when the smoke of battle made everything invisible. The equipment completed this lethal equation. The gladius, Rome's iconic short sword, wasn't an aesthetic choice, it was brilliant military engineering. At a time when most armies used long swords, Rome chose a short blade designed for precise thrusts in close combat. Add to that the testudo formation, a shield formation that turns soldiers into a human shell, nearly impervious to arrows, and you get a system where technology and tactics merged into a deadly answer for almost any situation. Rome didn't fight with muscle alone, it fought with systemic intelligence. And it's exactly this intelligence that leads us to the final reflection. What happens when you compare all of this to the deadliest warriors the modern world has ever produced? If a trained and motivated Roman legionary were transported into the modern world, what could he teach us? More than you might think. When you compare the Roman model with contemporary special forces, U.S. Navy SEALs, the British SAS, Israel's Sayeret Matkal, what stands out isn't vast differences, but striking parallels. Roman training was brutal, constant, and designed to eliminate the weak and forge the strong, just like modern special forces selection programs, where dropout rates of 90% are considered normal, even desirable. The differences, of course, are real. While Rome relied on physical strength and melee weapons, the modern warrior operates with advanced technology, digital warfare, and drones that have redefined the battlefield. But technology solves the problem of physical lethality. It does not solve the problem of human psychology under extreme pressure. And this is where Rome still has lessons to offer. What changes over the centuries is the equipment. What remains constant is the need for a human being with a steel mindset, capable of making the right decisions when everything around them is collapsing. The Romans built this through rigid hierarchy and a culture of honor. Modern armies build it through applied psychology and combat simulation. The method has changed, the essence remains the same. You made it this far, and that already says a lot about you. Most people move through the history of Rome like tourists, admiring the surface without ever stepping through the door. But you went further. You met Dentatus and understood that accumulated experience is the most lethal weapon there is. You saw Sceva standing with his body shattered and realized that mental resilience overcomes any physical limitation. You followed Silius as he turned an iron prosthetic into an extension of his will to win. You saw Flama refusing freedom and recognized that true purpose is worth more than any material reward. And you saw in Pullo something that exists in every human being who refuses to follow the script: controlled chaos as a tool for transformation. Now, the question that really matters is, what are you going to do with all of this? Because knowledge without application is just entertainment, and Rome was never just entertainment. Every lesson these warriors left behind cuts across the centuries and hits directly into your reality. What battle are you avoiding because you're afraid you won't survive it? What limitation are you using as an excuse when you should be forging your own iron prosthetic? In which arena of your life are you refusing freedom because deep down you know that's where you feel most alive? These are not rhetorical questions, they are invitations to an honest reflection that can change the direction of your life. Rome didn't produce legendary warriors by accident, it did so by creating an environment where mediocrity simply wasn't an option. What kind of environment are you creating for yourself? And look, if the story of 5 Roman warriors already impacted you, know that this is just the beginning. The Roman Empire is an endless universe of lessons, secrets, and stories that official history has never had the courage to tell the way they deserve to be told. There's much more coming: battles that changed the course of civilization, emperors who defied the logic of power, military strategies that the greatest modern armies still study in silence. If you want to continue this journey and be the first to know when the next video drops, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because those who arrive first always have the advantage. Just as Rome taught, the prepared inherit the world. The rest only watch.